First, I'd like to introduce you to Kelli Fierras, and she is a registered dietitian with a master's in exercise science and health promotion. She's been practicing as a registered dietitian and certified personal trainer since 2011. She has her own private practice called Get Well with Kel, which you can follow her on Instagram as well with the same name. She focuses on both nutrition and exercise with her clients. She is certified in adult weight management and is a pre- and postnatal corrective exercise specialist. If she isn't working, you can find her running around the streets of California training for an upcoming race. And also, I would now love to introduce you to Ali Gallop. And Ali is the Major League Dietitian for the Houston Astros Baseball Club in Houston, Texas, previously working as the Assistant Director of Sports Nutrition within the University of Utah Athletics Department in Salt Lake City, Utah. For the Astros, Ali runs a nutrition program for a 40-man roster, including medical nutrition therapy and performance nutrition programming. She tracks progress for her athletes, combines individual blood work, dietary analysis, body composition, and supplements and hydration plans. She earned her undergrad and clinical dietetic internship from the University of British Columbia. She's from Canada originally, in Vancouver. And she has a Master's of Nutrition in Nutrition Communication and Behavior Change from Tufts University in Boston, Massachusetts, and a diploma in sports nutrition from the International Olympic Committee. She is board certified as a specialist in sports dietetics and writes a performance nutrition blog at galloptovictory.com. So now I would love to turn it over to Kelli, who is going to share with us her personal story of mindful eating and how that really benefited her. So now I'm going to turn it over to you, Kelli.
Right, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Kelli. Thank you for that introduction, Kaylee. So today I'm just going to talk to you about mindful eating and intuitive eating, and so will Allie. But I do want to share my mindful eating story with you. So as Kaylee mentioned, I am a runner. I've been actively running since I was, I think, about 10 years old. I went off to run Division I track and field. I graduated in 2011. I had to think about that for a second. All right, so I want to talk to you guys about my experience when I was running and my relationship with food. All right, so I was always a middle distance runner growing up. And then when I went to college, my coach wanted to turn me into a distance runner. So that was a lot of mileage, and my mileage pretty much doubled. And I was not ready for that. My body was not ready for that. So I want to kind of tie this back to mindful eating. So with the mindful eating, I didn't fully understand at the time that I needed to listen more to my appetite, and that my appetite changes in general. And as my volume and intensity increased, my body needed more fuel, clearly. So when I didn't change my food routine, this kind of led to overeating later in the night, feeling lethargic during class. I was getting stress fractures. I was just very moody all the time because I didn't understand that mindfulness and how to tie it to the food. So I was ignoring my hunger cues. I was just not in the best place. And let's just say my freshman year of running was not successful at all. But then I started to get a better relationship with food that summer, going into my sophomore year. I started learning how to eat when I was hungry. I learned what foods were best for me before I ran, during my run, after my run. So I developed that relationship, felt much better, and had such a successful sophomore year and moving forward after that. So my energy levels were better throughout the day. My grades were better in class. So that's my mindfulness story with running. But there is one more thing I wanted to bring up, and I was telling Allie this earlier today. So my daughter just turned 1 year old, and I was watching her eat this morning. I made her French toast, and she picked up the food and she just kept touching it, and then she would smell it. She'd tap it on her tongue, and then she would chew it about 30 to 40 times before swallowing it. And I was just watching her, and I was like, wow, little kids really practice mindful eating, and we really need to mimic them. So I just thought that was so fascinating, especially with our talk today. All right, Allie, you're up. This is your time to shine.
All right. Well, speaking of graduating, I graduated to be a dietitian back in 2012 and was taking nutrition courses as early as 2006. And at the time, the way that I had been presented with nutrition information was do what's right for the client in front of you, include their favorite foods. But we were always taught about high sugar foods, high saturated fat. Trans fat was still pretty common in the food system, and it was more about, here are all the foods that can kill you, but still enjoy the food that we're telling you not to eat ever. So I found, and also if anybody's been following the news lately, just the idea of the dietitian and what they traditionally look like is a little bit under attack right now. So trying to learn at a very impressionable age about this balance between food is, it will kill you, but still enjoy it. But dietitians are meant to visually look thin. I had the trouble from always being an athlete through high school and thinking, okay, now I'm in an area or a career where I'm not expected to eat unhealthy food, and I'm always expected to look a certain way. And so I found the idea of practicing, well, a cheat meal, does that work for me? No, it doesn't. I'm always thinking about food and overthinking about food. Did a lot of trial and error. If I get all my fruit and veggies in the day, maybe by 8 p.m. I can have some chocolate, but then I just kept thinking about chocolate all day. So I finally found the mindful eating approach of what works for me. And that is, I wake up, bless the season for advent calendars. I wake up, have my chocolate like a 10-year-old kid. I have my coffee. And then I find that I don't crave sugar throughout the day. And so really just balancing, what do I know as a practitioner? What do I know for, yes, physical health, blood work is really important, but what's really left out of the conversation, which is really nice the past few years with mindful eating and intuitive eating, really coming into the popular stream of nutrition is, what's the impact of mental health in eating, and how do we have to bring all of these components together? So chocolate in the morning, dietitian approved. All right, Kelli, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Allie. I love that you brought up chocolate because we are going to be introducing some chocolate later on today. So if you guys do have chocolate, make sure you put it aside. We are going to get to have some later on. It is dietitian approved, as Allie said. So today, again, we are talking about mindful eating and intuitive eating. So I just want to talk about the definitions of both and how they are connected. All right. So mindful eating, intuitive eating, they both go hand in hand with each other. Mindful eating is more about being present in the moment and eating in the experience of a non-judgmental approach. And intuitive eating is a little bit broader. So it's more about the attuning to your inner cues to help obtain satisfaction from eating and rejecting the diet approach. All right, so we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into each of them. I just kind of wanted to give you an overview. All right, so both of these take work and they take time, mostly because we are so far out of tune with our body, especially with social media, what celebrities are doing, what the media on TV is telling us to do. So we're very out of tune with our body and really knowing what to do in general. And then also our busy lifestyles. I don't know about you guys, but right now with what's going on in the world, everybody is so busy. So we let that kind of take priority over really feeling hungry or letting ourselves feel full. So I know for myself, as I mentioned before that I ran track, I was surrounded by teammates who would eat very little to keep that quote unquote runner's body, which I don't believe in, but air quotes on that one. And they were amazing runners. And some of them were our top runners. So of course, for me as a freshman, I'm coming in and I'm thinking, wow, okay, so in order to be a good runner, you eat less. Until, of course, I have my nutrition courses and learned that was totally wrong. So I would look at them and really associate those two things, but then I came to realize that it's short-term success. The detrimental effects came afterwards, stress, fractures, injuries, long-term effects. Their bones are very brittle now. A lot of them aren't even running anymore. So as I mentioned, a lot of it is short-term. At least that's what I saw. So let's dive a little bit deeper into mindful eating now. All right, so mindful eating is really paying attention to an eating experience with every single one of our senses. So you're gonna see it, you're gonna taste it, you're gonna hear it, you're gonna smell it, you're gonna feel it, all these different things. And we're gonna do a fun activity later on where we use all those senses. And we witness the emotional and the physical responses that take place before, during, and then after that eating experience. So again, just being very mindful. So you want to acknowledge the responses to food without judgment whatsoever. So becoming aware of the physical hunger and fullness cues, and to navigate our decisions to then begin and end eating. All right, so really focusing on just doing one thing at a time. And I know Allie's going to touch on this later, but no distractions, no phone, no TV, just being in the moment and just focusing on eating. All right, so now we're going to dive a little bit more into intuitive eating. And this is more of a health promoting practice, and it puts your mental health right up there with your physical health. So I know Allie mentioned mental health is major, and this is something that I feel like over the last couple of years we've really been focusing on, which is awesome, and we should have been this whole time. But we focus more on sustainable changes with intuitive eating, and changes that improve the quality of your eating patterns. So no quick fixes, no fad diets. We're just really increasing the awareness of what our body needs. What is it telling us? It's rooted in our health promoted goals and really our biological and psychological needs. All right, so I want to talk about how this might be hard, especially for athletes, to adapt to this kind of style. I know I tried to relate it to myself, and I know a lot of people listening might be very active. So I wanted to talk about, why would this be challenging? So athletes are very designed to have specific plans. You're coached, you're told exactly what your training schedule looks like. If you're fortunate enough to have a dietitian on staff, they're telling you what to eat most of the time. You really have that structured schedule. But then when you're out of school and you're no longer an athlete, you're kind of thrown into the world and you're like, shoot, my schedule's changed. I don't really know how to listen to my body. I don't really remember what those cues feel like. So the intuitive eating really plays a role in how to understand your hunger, how to understand your appetite, how to understand when you're full, that satiety, all of those different things. So intuitive eating website does define intuitive eating as self-care framework, integrating instinct, emotion, and rational thought. All right, so when we think about instinct, this is more talking about what do we want in that moment, okay, at that given time. So Allie and I, we were reading this one article yesterday, and I thought this was so on point, and I'm totally using this with all of my clients moving forward. A good analogy here is when you have to go to the bathroom, so when you have to pee, you aren't going to say, oh no, it has to be something else. Like, you have to go to the bathroom when your bladder is full. Whereas when your stomach hungry, we tend to go, maybe I'm not hungry. Maybe I should ignore those signals. We tend to do that, and then we become low in energy, and then we tell our body that it's not hungry and it needs to wait till later. So we'll talk later on in the slides how that affects us emotionally with stress and all of that fun stuff. And Allie will talk more about emotional eating, but rationale is more connecting that science and the experience. So understanding, when to add a protein to that carbohydrate when we're craving just carbohydrates. So again, we'll dive a little bit more deeper into all of these, but I'll let Allie take it away now.
Through a few slides just talking about different types of hunger. Typically, we're only told that you have hunger or you have appetite, but I'm going to talk about 3 forms called stomach hunger, heart hunger, and mouth hunger. So at its core, the stomach hunger is that physiological drive to eat. Your body is saying, for all of the demands that I'm being asked, I need more fuel to function. And really, hunger is the outcome of these higher circulating levels of the hormones responsible for stimulating your hunger. So a little of ghrelin, a little of something called gastric inhibitory polypeptide, and also a little bit of your blood sugars starting to trend down, where you might be feeling a little bit weak and lightheaded. So when we talk about your body asking for fuel to cover the Some of it is very conscious and some of it is very unconscious. So from an unconscious perspective, just breathing multiple times per minute, 24/7, it's a huge coordination of multiple muscle groups contracting and relaxing. We don't really think about breathing like the same way we would, doing a set of bicep curls. But really, your body is doing a lot of things that we don't think about. And then from the conscious perspective, it's, do I have enough fuel so that I can get through my workout, that I can lift for 60 minutes and eat enough to fuel those training adaptations. So some of it is very obvious, the energy demands that we're asking our body to cover, and some aren't as obvious. The part that really gets in the way of this true physiological hunger can be exercise. So when I worked at Utah, I worked with our cross-country track team. And I know Kelli and I have talked a lot about it, is, how do you convince an athlete to eat when they're not hungry? Even if it's that true physiological hunger. So if you have, I remember one time we had an athlete, she wore a polar heart rate monitor, and it would tell her that during some of her longer runs, she was burning 900 calories. And this is 900 calories on top of the 2,500 calories she needed to simply survive throughout the day. So breathing, walking around campus, the fidgeting legs, all of that. So I find with our endurance athletes, sometimes that hunger and that physiological hunger, it's not necessarily my stomach hurts, therefore I am hungry. It's, let's take your body and your training program into consideration when creating a fueling program. So for the everyday person, I'm currently with my family back home in Canada. We might go for a walk for coffee every day, and they can really tune into those true hunger signals. Whereas for me, if I was to go to a run today, it gets a little bit more complicated when you add exercise into that. So just be mindful that sometimes the true physiological hunger to cover the demands of what you're putting on your body isn't always stomach grumbling. And so with our next topic, really how to recognize your hunger cues, the first thing I ask athletes is, what does hunger feel like to you? So from watching, growing up watching TV, anytime someone's hungry, they're usually their stomach and they're like, oh, my stomach's grumbling, I must be hungry. Or those Snicker ads where everyone gets really upset and it's like, it's not you when you're hungry, or you're not you when you're hungry. So I think of hunger as two phases. So the first is a very early, nuanced, gradual onset of hunger. So you're starting to feel hungry, you're getting those small fluctuations in those I need to eat hormones. And again, maybe your blood sugars are starting to come down a little bit. So this gradual onset is, you're at your desk working and all of a sudden you just think about a banana. And you're like, I'm a little hungry, I could go for something like that. Maybe you're biting your nails, maybe you're starting to produce some more saliva in the mouth, starting to salivate, you're becoming thirsty. It's a very nuanced progression. And typically at that point, like I mentioned with the banana, the gradual onset of hormones, the small gradual onset of hunger and the small fluctuations in hormones, you're starting to crave like a reasonable snack or meal. Like I could go for a banana, maybe some yogurt, something within my health promoting goals for nutrition plan. But then the longer you go, kind of like Kelli mentioned about the bathroom, if you're like, I have to go to the bathroom, and you wait 15 minutes, you're like, I really need to go to the bathroom. So now your body's starting to scream at you. You're getting those larger fluctuations in hormones. Your body's like, you've ignored me, now I'm really hungry. That's when hunger becomes a little bit more typical. So maybe you have the stomach grumbling, maybe you have a bloated stomach, which is quite common and a lot of people perceive as a food intolerance. It could just be you haven't eaten in a while. It could be stomach discomfort, headache, you're lightheaded, you're starting to get shaky, you're starting to really overthink and maybe obsess about food. But you also tend to crave higher fat, higher calorie, higher carb foods. So maybe that's when instead of a reasonable meal, you're starting to crave fried chicken and fries. And you're like, what's wrong with me? It's not you, it's your hormones, right? But the other part is thinking about, is it truly fuel that you need? So being on the West Coast right now, I'm in that mid-afternoon slump where a nap is probably a better option for me. But the area of the brain, the hypothalamus in the brainstem, that has centers for hunger, sleep, and thirst. It's all in that same area. And so sometimes when we think, oh, we're hungry, you're actually sleepy, you're actually thirsty. And so is it really a granola bar that you need? Is it the candy in the office drawer? Had we been back in the office buildings? Like, what's really going on? So it's good to always think about the context of, if you're feeling hungry, is it, I haven't drank in a while, I haven't eaten in a while, I slept for 3 hours last night. So really trying to interpret, what are you really feeling? And the last part of this hunger is, what else is going on besides true hunger? And that's where we talk about heart hunger and mouth hunger being emotional eating. Maybe it's simply appetite, cravings, or habits. So with emotional eating, this is the second part of hunger, being heart hunger. And emotional eating, it's using food to more suppress or deal with emotions. And so you're eating for reasons other than hunger. And again, this can be consciously or unconsciously. You break up with your partner and you're like, I'm going to drink away my sorrows in a bottle of wine and some Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Like, you know what you're doing. Or it's unconsciously. Maybe you're working from home, you're lonely, and you close your laptop for the day and you think, well, I'm just gonna order some pizza. So that could be a form of emotional eating that you just might not be registering. But typically during this period, your strongest cravings for foods are appearing at your weakest points emotionally. And again, thinking about hormones, when you think about the reward center for the brain, when we eat the foods that we would choose during one of these like emotional eating scenarios, they tend to be the foods that make us feel better. We're releasing dopamine, and that's that feel good, pleasurable euphoria. So while you're eating, everything feels great. But a way to recognize emotional eating is, again, your craving comes on suddenly. It's not this true hunger, gradual projection or progression. There's no slow buildup. You crave only certain foods. I'm hard pressed to find an athlete who's like, oh, I'm so stressed, so I've been eating a lot of carrots and hummus. Like it just doesn't happen. And as I said, when you're eating the foods that you enjoy, yes, you're getting the dopamine release, but 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours later, you might start to feel uncomfortably full. You might feel uncomfortable in general, and sometimes these are associated with guilt or shame feelings. So I always ask athletes, take a step back. What's the context? What are you feeling leading up to these food choices? Is it a certain day of the week? Is it every day? Is it when you're in the context of another person or not? Is it a high stress period? Like, what's going on? So again, it takes a little bit of honesty to dissect emotional eating, but if you're willing to take a very fair and honest look at all of the surrounding factors leading up to those patterns, then it's easier to figure out what's going on. And then the last part of hunger is going to be the mouth hunger. So this is more of like, I like it, I smell it, I see it. So working in baseball, if you are a position player, so you play second base, you play left field, those are the athletes who are playing every single day. So their nutritional requirements are pretty steady. Higher calories, higher carbohydrates. But we also have our starting baseball pitcher. So even though pitching is easily the highest energy expenditure position in baseball, they're only pitching once every 5 days. So yes, on the day they're pitching, very high calorie needs, but the other 4-5 days maybe, they're coming into the clubhouse that has the exact same food setup. So in our clubhouse, you walk in, the dining area is immediately to the left. And so in a normal year where we have a buffet spread of food, all of their favorite foods are there. The smells are there. They see their fellow athletes sitting at a table eating. So for a starting baseball pitcher, they're not thinking, oh, well, I'm not pitching today, so I shouldn't eat. They're thinking, oh, I see all my favorite foods. I smell them. So-and-so told me to come sit with him. I'm not just going to sit and watch him eat. I'm going to go grab a plate of food. So even though very similar to emotional eating, where the mouth hunger, the environmental eating cues are overriding that true hunger, it's not necessarily a emotional driven choice. It's a habitual choice, and it's an excitement to eat. So again, it's you like the food, you smell the food, you see the food. I know here I say chocolate, but I don't keep it out on the counter because every time I would walk by it, I'd probably eat it. So again, it's really adding context to what else besides hormones and besides emotions are playing into your decisions to make certain choices around eating. All right, I think Kelly's got a question for you all.
All right, so our question here is, when your body needs food, will you always feel hungry? I'm going to give you guys a little bit to answer that, and then we will come up with a good answer together. So feel free to comment in the section. Let me know what you think. So when your body needs food, will you always feel hungry? I wish we had like a little song that would play here. All right, I'll give it a couple more seconds and then we'll talk about it. All right. So with this question, the answer is you're not, and I know Allie kind of touched on this, you might not always feel that hunger. You know, your stomach might not always be growling. So there's a couple different things that play a role with this. So mental health conditions like anxiety, depression, stress, they can all have that negative effect on hunger levels. And this can cause that lack of appetite even when your body does need food. I know for myself, when I'm feeling super stressed or anxious, I don't necessarily get the same feelings of hunger when I should. And also, some people who do certain diets, or you fast, or whatever the diet of the day is these days, you go for long periods of time without eating, and then you start to train your body that way. So when you start to train your body to not eat, your body starts to forget what it's like to feel hungry, and then stop sending those cues. So the answer to that is no, your body won't always feel hungry, especially if you're going through a couple of those things like I just mentioned. All right, so let's talk about, you guys all got them right. You guys are super smart. All right, so let's talk about how to balance your meals and snacks. So balancing your meals and snacks can be a little bit difficult. I like to tell people making sure you have all the different food groups. So you have your carbs, your fat, and your proteins to make a good meal or a snack. You might not always have access to every single one of them, but trying to get all three of those to help regulate those blood sugars, which we'll talk about in a second. But that's what's going to help you feel full, help those energy levels not have those afternoon crashes. And then when it comes to snacks, it's also really helpful to plan ahead just to make sure you have those snacks on hand. So for myself, I know my car in the middle console, I always have a secret stash of snacks because sometimes I don't know how long I'll be out. And if it goes longer than a certain amount of time, I start to get really hungry and start to get very irritable. So I have my secret stash of snacks, whether it's nuts, seeds, any, string cheese, whatever it may be. So I always make sure to have those things on hand. So my biggest suggestion is to make sure you guys have nutritious snacks on hand. Make sure you have those different food groups like the carbs, the fats, the proteins, and I'll talk about all the different things that you can, like the snacks you could have in a little bit. But I think those different food groups will definitely help with keeping those blood sugars stable. All right, so now let's talk about not fighting our hormones. Now, let's talk about what hormones are. So hormones are your body's chemical messengers, all right? They travel in your bloodstream to tissues and to your organs and help them do their work and what they're supposed to do. So with ghrelin, that's your hunger hormone. And then you also have leptin, which is your satiety hormone, feeling full. Now, Allie and I were talking about this when we were preparing for this presentation, is when holidays come up, which, we have a ton of holidays coming up, people like to save their calories and go all day without eating and then decide to have all their calories in one sitting. All right, so at this point, your hormones are going to work against you and they're going to win. All right, so when we feel extremely hungry, and I felt this before, when I run out of my emergency stash in my car and I go too long without eating, our hunger signals become so strong, you become irritable. You start to become shaky. You don't even care about what you're going to eat. The next thing you see is exactly what you're going to put in your mouth. So we don't make the best choices when we get to that point. So yeah, even if I go to the grocery store, if I go to the gym and then I head to the grocery store, I notice that things in my cart are high carbohydrate foods. Not that they're bad, but like more junk food, more snacks. And then I realize, wow, you know, I'm super hungry and that's why I'm making these choices right now. Whereas if I had a snack after the gym or a post-workout meal, I might make better food choices. All right, so let's talk about how to, or why we should be eating every 2 to 4 hours. All right, so for me, with my clients, they get very nervous when I say, let's start to eat every 2 to 4 hours. Why? Because they associate it with overeating and weight gain, especially if you've been crash dieting or fasting and you go for long periods without eating. All of a sudden, I'm asking you to add more food into your routine and more often. So that can be really scary, and I totally understand that. So when you make sure to eat something every 2 to 4 hours, you're gonna prevent those blood sugars from getting too low. All right, the low blood sugars are gonna make you feel confused. They're gonna make you feel fatigued, cranky. I don't know about you guys, but I get hangry when my blood sugars start to drop. So they're gonna trigger you to really just overeat at your next meal. And usually it's something that's very high in carbohydrates. So like Ali said, you know, if you start to notice yourself grabbing the things that are a little bit higher in carbs, that might mean that you went 4 to 5 hours without eating. So I highly recommend when you guys are eating, start tracking or just keeping note of how long did you go? You know, are you getting the sense of feeling tired, irritable? Are you choosing foods that are higher in carbohydrates and not adding those proteins to them? Okay. And then snacking between your meals will stop these effects from happening. They'll keep you energized, they'll keep you focused, they'll help you make more of those mindful choices. All right, so I think one of the things that Ali always says, and when I read her blog, it says, willpower is not a muscle that can be constantly flexed. And that's something that's always stuck with me, and I love it. And I think it's something we should really focus on is, you know, starving yourself or going long periods of time. That doesn't mean you're doing something right. And it means that, you know, you might be setting yourself up for failure, especially later on in the day when you make poor food choices. All right, so I think, Ali, you are up next.
Please. Aha. So one thing to just keep in mind with alcohol, I know it's very holiday appropriate. I also saw on the news the other night that at least where I am in Western Canada right now, we are hitting records for how much alcohol people are buying. So I think that goes to say, yes, the holidays, yes, COVID, and a lot of, you know, people can't go to the bar, so they bring the bar to themselves. But one thing to keep in mind with alcohol, yes, it can negatively impact your hormones. But if you're thinking about the mindfulness, one of the reasons people love alcohol is it is the drug of choice. So you don't have to be yourself when you get buzzed. And in regard, yeah, you're not being yourself, you're feeling drunk, but you're also picking foods that you normally wouldn't include in your daily plan. And so, you know, one of the things I always tell my athletes is, you know, if you're going to drink a couple cans of beer or, you know, a bottle of wine might not be like a night out. That's just like a normal thing for them is, you know, if your goal is to be more mindful about what you're eating, when you're drunk, you're not going to be mindful about what you're eating. You're either using the being drunk as an excuse to eat your favorite foods that you can kind of have that like escape moment. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend the alcohol at all. But if you're able to do it safely, have some carbohydrates, have some fat, have a little bit of a meal in your stomach already, just to help slow the alcohol's progression into your bloodstream. So minimize alcohol as much as possible, but just be aware that it's really going to pull you away from the mindfulness and the reason that you're practicing mindful and intuitive eating in the first place. So we have a question for the group. So again, get your fingers ready. True or false, stress makes you hungrier? Let's see. What do you guys think? All right. All right. So when it comes to stress making you hungrier, I would say it could be true or false. So one thing to keep in mind is eating is very society driven. So in your family growing up, were you told that, oh, when I'm stressed out, I choose awful foods, right? So in your case, it might just be more environmentally driven. What were you raised to believe? The area where I would say it doesn't make you feel hungrier. And in talking to Kelli the other day, she said when she's stressed, her appetite is suppressed. And you might also get this. Any kind of cortisol release can be an appetite suppressant. So a lot of my athletes will be like, well, I just played for 3 hours, but I don't feel hungry. It hits me in an hour and a half. And you're like, right. That is when the stress is starting to come down. But that, again, that physiological hunger is there. One other thing is when athletes feel stressed and they don't eat, again, when they finally do feel hungry, they're not making the best choices. So I think depending on the scenario, stress may make you hungrier, it may not make you hungrier, but typically it's going to lead you to eat foods that make you feel good versus foods that are meeting your just overall nutritional goals. So a few slides just to talk about cortisol and stress management and some more mindfulness is the biggest thing that I think of when lowering cholesterol levels is what is consistently driving them up. So it's very normal. Your body is designed to spike cortisol. So it could be any perceived stress. It could be going for a run. It could be work. It could be family. So cortisol is going to increase to tell your brain like, whew, we're stressed. Something's not right. Not the end of the world if your cortisol spikes here and there. Very normal. The concern is the word consistency. If you're consistently stressed, if you're consistently exercising, not recovering, suffering from overtraining, consistently high cortisol levels are not the idea and not the goal. So when I tie higher cortisol levels back to mindful eating and nutrition, my thought is, well, why is eating leading to a stress? So consistently is eating very erratic for you. So your body has no trust thinking, okay, on an every 2 to 4 hours, we're receiving some food. I trust my body to feed me. I don't have to start spiking hormones to be like, why aren't you listening to me? I need my basic needs met. Another area is the endurance or the physique athlete. They're not consuming enough calories to cover their day-to-day needs plus their training. So their body is going to be stressed in that regard. You could be anxious around food. You could be anxious around your body image. Again, unnecessary stressors that the body perceives as a threat. So again, the key word is consistency. A little bit of stress here and there, not the end of the world. It makes sense with a bit of exercise, but if you're consistently stressing out your body, you're going to tax it out and it's going to fight back. So one thing that I speak with my athletes a lot is not necessarily stress management, but stress minimization. So I watch a lot of Grey's Anatomy, and COVID has worsened that with Netflix. And one thing that always gets me is when they're in the operating room and they're freaking out and they're like, well, what's the source of the bleed, right? If you're bleeding internally, the goal isn't to let's just stitch up the abdomen. It's like what within the abdomen is bleeding? Where can we find the source of this bleed? And so a lot of the times, having been a runner myself, it's, oh, if you're stressed, just go for a run. if you're stressed, just use exercise to fix it, to manage it. When really it's like, well, let's take a step back, similar to the emotional eating, take a step back and get a sense of the context around that stress. What is contributing to it? What leads up to it? Are there people involved? Like, what is the source of the bleed? What is the source of the stress? Because at that point, rather than trying to manage something that seems very broad, like people just say, I'm stressed out all the time. It's like, well, what are you stressed out about? And again, it could be maybe your body is just suffering from overtraining. Maybe you're just stressed out because you've never spent Christmas on your own and you can't spend it with family, and COVID is really killing that for you. Maybe you're purposely under eating. Maybe you're unintentionally under eating. And again, maybe it comes back to a bit of body image. So when I think about, what is simmering beneath the surface? Where's the source of that bleed? Because you can always manage stress, but that's just like a Band-Aid approach. So, if you have a coworker who is stressing you out all the time, like a kind of like emotional eating, you can eat, feel good in the moment, but you're not going to feel good in an hour or the next day. Similar with coworker stress, a run's going to make you feel really good while you're doing it and a little bit afterwards, but you're not focusing on, well, what's the key concern? So stress management, stress minimization is, be like Meredith Grey and find the source of the bleed. That's for sure. And the last part that I'm going to talk about is really just mindfulness with your activity and your movement. So I moved to Houston mid-March of 2020, right when it felt like the entire country was put on pause. Fitness facilities were closed, restaurants were closed. We had a pool in my apartment, couldn't use the gym. And all of a sudden, I'm a very active person. I was in my 1-bedroom apartment with my cat. And of course I ordered a bike trainer, and it was on back order because Amazon was next day delivery turned into 6 months from now. But I ended up finding a Boston-based Pilates instructor, Cara Duval, on Instagram. And the idea of just slowing down and listening to my body and being like, okay, maybe running isn't what I need right now to deal with all of the stress of COVID and a new job and a new city, and not being able to go meet my coworkers or go out and meet new friends is, I really kind of turned inward and was like, okay, let's get some of this stress out that I don't really know how to label it right now, and just started doing Pilates, which was wonderful and terribly hard. So if you guys haven't checked her out, check her out. But really it was an opportunity to slow down, focus on my body, try to work through like, what am I actually feeling? And rather than just thinking, well, I'm going to go do a high intensity workout just to sweat. And again, stress management, maybe not stress minimization. So depending on the person, I find if you are someone who just finds running is like the key, if you're finding you want to go for a run to blow off some steam, I would recommend just doing it without a watch, doing it without a heart rate monitor, and running for the pure joy of it, and not attaching, numbers to it. Definitely a time and a place for that. But if you're using exercise for stress management, then I do try to kind of divert our athletes away from adding numbered goals to that. Until they figure out what they're trying to deal with from a stress perspective. Some of it might be adding a timer to social media usage. So I have that on Instagram. You can do that through the app, because social media right now, comparing everybody's lives while we're all supposed to be sitting in our apartments can be pretty hard as well. But for other people, it's drawing, it's doodling, it's just focusing on breath work, which has a lot of research in regards to stress management minimization. But it's really finding, what works for you in very specific scenarios. And if you don't quite know the source of the stress, I would say try to find a stress-reducing activity that you're not necessarily going to judge yourself on. Because the worst is if you feel bad, you go for a run, and you look at your pace, and you're like, that sucked. I'm so slow. It's not going to help.
Okay, so we got some questions on mindful eating for you guys. So first and foremost, what are some foods that are best for balancing hormones?
Ooh.
That's a good one.
I'd say at its core, you get these questions a lot where it's like, what's the best fruit to have? What's the best of this to have? I would say it's more consistency. So if you're thinking more of like a whole foods approach, especially more of a plant-based approach, and you're good about balancing your snacks and meals, meaning at a snack you have some sort of protein and a carb. So I usually tell people, like, do some turkey jerky, or maybe like a small handful of almonds and a piece of fruit. Keep it really simple. And then with your meals, really thinking, do I have some sort of carbohydrate or starch? So like a potato or pasta. Is there a protein source? Is there some fruits and veggies? So I don't try to go too into the details, because one, I find people just start to hyper focus on that. But also when we're thinking about hormones, it's, are you able to create a predictable pattern for your brain and make sure that it's kind of like, you think, there's one behavioral therapy where they talk about the horse and the rider. The horse is in control. That's your body. The rider is the person who is there to provide consistency and really build that relationship. So you're trying to just build that relationship, and that relationship of expectation. So I wouldn't necessarily go into specifics, but I think always a plant-based approach and just that consistency throughout the day, so your body knows what to expect.
I love that answer. Thank you.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you, Allie. I think everybody's different too. And when you create that consistency and your body knows what it's doing, again, it kind of ties into everything we talked about today. Your energy levels are better. Your blood sugars are more stable. I know for myself, for me, nuts, edamame, string cheese and a piece of fruit, those things are staples in my diet just because it works for me. And I know I'm kind of performing at my best when I have those types of snacks, but you have to look at more of the overall picture, and not, like you said, don't hyper focus on just that one snack.
Awesome. So the next question is, how can I make sure to eat when I'm actually hungry and not just when I'm emotional? So I know you guys touched on this a little bit, but it's always good to reiterate.
Yeah, like I said, I always ask, what's the context around it? So very common for some of our athletes to be like, man, like I have big sweet tooth at night. That's what I need to focus on. And I asked them, okay, well, what's going on? Is it, for some people, they're not eating enough throughout the day. And so by the time it catches up with you at night, you're having what you feel is hunger, which could very well be hunger, but you're also having that emotional component of, I'm under eating, I need to, choose the ice cream, choose this, whatever. Or you eat and then you feel hungry 20 minutes later. And so sometimes it's taking a real bird's eye approach of like, what are you doing throughout the day or not doing, whether you're doing it on purpose or not. And then it comes down to, what kind of feelings do you have leading up to choosing your food? What's the, are there people with you always, and you're just watching Netflix together and you always make popcorn? So I think when it comes down to the emotional eating part, it again is taking a step back and really being mindful and aware of like, what are those emotions? Sometimes it's helpful to just write it down, and maybe you're not going to change anything for a week. You're still going to emotionally eat at night, but at least you start to see those patterns. So yeah, I think it's more of a bird's eye view approach.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. I don't think I would add too much, but the one thing is if you guys start to find yourself emotionally eating, like Ali said, track it, see if you start to notice a trend. But also, it's okay to have these foods when you're feeling a certain way too. So don't beat yourself up. It's just, and especially if that food makes you feel good in the moment, so be it, right? And look at the overall picture. Don't just look at that one moment where, you may have had to slip up, air quotes, but yeah, I would just say take that bird's eye approach, like Ali said.
That's an awesome answer. And it kind of goes into the next question we have, which is it okay to give into cravings for quote unquote bad foods, or do I always need to try to find a healthier alternative?
Yeah. I'd say at your core, I mean, like I said, for me, a cheat meal once a week does not work. So if you're someone who knows, kind of two-pronged, if you're someone who knows that, like, I'm not going to be able to wait 2 days for whatever this, who said Saturday had to be a cheat day, then I would say engage. But another part to consider is, totally just lost my train of thought. Oh no. Okay. Go ahead. I just dropped that ball.
No, I just think in our world today, we're so focused on always finding a healthier alternative,
Yeah.
especially with like recipes, right? People are always asking me, oh, should I use low fat this? And I'm like, how often are you eating this recipe? Is it once in a while? Is it every night? And they're just like, no, once a month I like to bake. And I'm like, eat the butter, eat the full fat. It's okay, and don't beat yourself up about that either. And so I would say my answer is no, you don't always have to find the healthier alternative unless you start to notice it's becoming a habit and it's becoming something that is detrimental to your health. But also you need to learn to enjoy food for what it is.
Yeah, I completely remembered what I was going to say, and thank you for saying that. It used to happen to me again, trying to be a dietitian, eat healthy. It went with everything I was learning at the time, and sometimes it's like I wanted a Dairy Queen Blizzard, and I'd be like, no, that's not healthy. So then I was like, what's like a Blizzard? Oh, dairy. I'll have some yogurt with some fruit in it, and I'd eat that, feel good. An hour later, I'm like, man, I really crave ice cream. So then I try to like find all these healthy things, and eventually I was like, screw it, I'm going to Dairy Queen. So I think it's fair to, if why try to skirt the craving? If it's a true craving, and like Kelli said, you have it once a month, like who cares? I think it's more kind of like anything with the extremes. If you're doing it every single day, multiple times a day, yeah, maybe we try to find some alternatives. But if it's just once in a while, enjoy your life. YOLO.
Awesome. You guys heard it from them, YOLO. Okay, so we just have 2 more questions. There's more, but I'll choose 2 more that I think are really important. So are there any tips that you use or tricks yourself for eating more slowly? Like how to remind yourselves at mealtimes to eat more slowly and be present while eating and not like distracted on technology?
Yeah, so I would say this one's tricky, especially kind of reverting back to earlier in our presentation where we live such busy lifestyles. We're eating on the go. We are, sometimes I'm guilty of it. I'll be taking a phone call and eating at the same time, trying to juggle a toddler. So I totally understand. But things that help me are water. So drinking water with my meals. That's one big thing that I've been working on. Trying to put my fork down between bites, sitting down at an actual table. I know that sounds weird, but not sitting on the couch, not sitting at your computer desk, like sitting at a table, and I'll sit with my other half and we'll just talk about our day. So talking a little bit more so that I'm not constantly just shoving food in my face. So I would say water, putting fork down between bites, trying to chew a little bit more thoroughly. And then also for me, I'll wait like 20 minutes after I'm done eating and then ask myself, am I still hungry? Do I need seconds? And if my body's telling me yes, then I go for seconds. But after that, if I'm good, then that's what helps me.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'd say my 2 things. One is plate it. So it's really easy to, again, if you're watching Netflix and you're eating out of a bag, by the time you clue in what you're doing, you're like, I don't know how much I ate. So put it in a bowl, put the bulk item away, and then it just gives you a little bit of a sense more of like, what have you done? And the other is, like I said, I have an Instagram timer. If I have an hour a day to play on Instagram, I have 15 minutes to put my phone down and create that space to just eat in a relaxed manner, pay attention to what I'm eating. Because the worst is when you're just checking emails, putting the food in, all of a sudden you look down, your plate's empty, you're like, I'm still hungry. And like Kelli said, before your brain and your stomach have that opportunity to communicate and say I'm full, you're already looking for more food. So
yeah,
be kind to yourself.
Agreed. And I think also is we always find time to exercise, right? We plan out an hour and that time's to exercise. Like treat your food just like you would with working out. Make that time for just eating and being a little bit more mindful.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love the tips of sitting down and just like blocking your phone away, and also being with family. I always find like being with family helps you be a little bit more mindful, and also just enjoy the meal a lot more. So the final question actually does have to do with family, and it has a little bit to do with emotional eating. So, and I think for those of you watching, you might find this really helpful during the holiday season. So how can I not feel stressed / triggered by family during holiday meals?
Yeah, this is a good one.
I would always say, I always find like when I've worked with people who have more of like a family dynamic with eating, it's usually one or two people. And so I would say, take that person aside and just be honest. Like when you make these comments, it just doesn't help me, especially like it adds stress to me eating. It makes me not want to eat a lot of times. So I think it's, if it's someone and you trust them, they might not even realize what they're doing. Or they think it's trying to help you, but it's not. So I think if it's a family eating environment, and you can kind of, again, get that context and be really honest, like, is this someone specifically? Then I'd say just talk to them. It's hard, but it's family and it's your eating. They don't know if you're hungry or full.
Right. I agree. And I also think, I feel like I deal with this question a lot with families and judgment around eating. I always tell people, feel free to blame it on me. So, hey, my dietitian, even if you're not working with a dietitian, you could say, my dietitian just told me that, we're going to focus on this and like this is all that, I should be having at this time, even if it's really false. But take the blame off yourself and take that stress and pressure. I know for myself, and Allie talked about this, like being a dietitian, if I eat a slice of pizza, people look at me like, oh my gosh, you eat pizza or you eat ice cream? And it's like, yeah, I'm a normal human too. I have cravings and just like everybody else. So I think definitely feel free to take the blame off yourself and put it on us.
I love that. And going off that, for those of you who've never worked with a dietitian and you feel like that's something you want to do, it is really important. So definitely seek out support and help. And for those of you who do test with InsideTracker, we do provide dietitian consults, which is wonderful. So to review your results, and it's super illuminating because it's one thing to read your results. It's another thing to kind of hear exactly what to focus on from a person, especially a registered dietitian. So thank you both so much for this presentation. It's been a blast. You're both so much fun and just so smart and have wonderful experience. So thank you for sharing your energy with us and your wisdom, and for teaching us how to eat more mindfully. I know a lot of us are now going to want to start our mornings with chocolate. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
And, Kelli gave us a lot of great ideas for how to eat the chocolate very slowly that we can now practice. So yeah, have a wonderful evening, ladies, and thank you so much.